Hey everyone, welcome to our preview show for this week's exciting college football games, the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, I just got off waxing poetic about the voodoo magic and the crazy witchy things that have happened at Jordan Hare Stadium. Well, you just had the craziest of all of them happen last week against Missouri, but that leads into a rivalry that has had more than its fair share of crazy endings at Jordan Hare and in general, and that's the Auburn LSU series, which, while it is not as important as the Auburn Alabama, the Iron Bowl, or of course the Auburn Georgia, the Deep South's oldest rivalry, the Auburn LSU series has its own, has a mind of its own. It's a very important game that has crazy improbable endings, maybe even more so than what you get in the Iron Bowl or in the Deep South's oldest rivalry. And I was talking about earlier in this last segment where I was analyzing some of the craziest endings that they've had, where Auburn just snuck victory out of the jaws of defeat at Jordan Hare in important games. Some of the 2016 Auburn LSU game, where it was basically a known thing that if Auburn lost the game, that Gus Malzahn was going to lose his job. Lo and behold, Les Miles didn't get the snap off in time to get the touchdown, and Les Miles got shown the door while Gus ended up having a pretty good season in the next year, winning the SEC West and actually having a chance to get Auburn in the college football playoff. This is my reminder to Auburn fans that things can look bleak, but they can turn around really fast. And I see a lot of things in this Auburn team that are kind of similar to that 2016 team. I see a defense that can be pretty strong. It's got good linebacker play. I see good running backs. Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter are excellent running backs. There's poor quarterback play, but this is a game that can really turn the tide of Auburn's season and maybe mean that they could still have a solid season and maybe prepare for the next season and still save Brian Harson's job. And Joe, on the flip side of this is going to be the most intense environment that Brian Kelly has played in, maybe as a football coach ever. Because you think about it, at Notre Dame, maybe he went to USC, hasn't been much of an environment. I guess maybe he's gone to Michigan, which can be, very loud, but he's never been in a rivalry, in an SEC rivalry, in a stadium where things like this happen at night. And I'm just fascinated to see how LSU plays in this game based on the fact that Brian Kelly is going to be a deer in the headlights when he sees this atmosphere.
It's going to be interesting because I feel like there are three games this weekend where, for me personally, it's almost a coin flip. This game, A&M, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss, Kentucky, like, for me, it's a pick 'em. I really cannot get a good read on any of those three games. If you told me any of those six teams won, I would not be surprised, starting with this game. I think that coming out of the Florida State game, I would have picked Auburn to win.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to probably surprise you and go LSU. Not really a particular reason other than I have seen LSU get some momentum coming out of that opening loss and then also knocking off Mississippi State the way they did.
Yeah, Joe. I mean, I think that by every right, LSU should win this game. I think they're better than Auburn, probably better coached than Auburn is. I just, I look at this and I really think that the atmosphere that Auburn is going to have, LSU, I think, is also looking forward a little bit because they have Tennessee next week. That's going to be something that they got coming up right there. It's going to be a top 10 Tennessee game. I've seen LSU drop a really close game already this year, and one in which it was a friendly environment. They lost a game in the Superdome. I don't even know if the history of time if LSU had lost a game in the Superdome before this game they lost against Florida State where they missed the extra point. And, that's something that kind of rubs me a little bit wrong. I think that, like I said, this is going to be Brian Kelly's first game as an SEC head coach in what is one of the best environments in the SEC. And like I said, I mean, I really think that this Auburn team knows they're playing for Brian Harson's job, because I almost feel like at this point, you of course remember the movie Remember the Titans, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is
Right.
it? What is it that Coach Boone is told, like within the first couple weeks that he's there, that The second you lose a football game, you're getting fired. That's basically where Brian Harsin is right now. He's got passes against teams like Alabama and Georgia, but everyone else pretty much he's got to win most of them. And this is one that I think he has to have to win. And you look at it from a logical standpoint. I think LSU's got a better quarterback. I think Jaden Daniels is limited when it comes to passing, but he's a very good rushing quarterback. I think LSU's defensive line is going to have a lot of success against Auburn. But one thing I do like what Auburn has right now, and I think that can work against LSU, is they're susceptible to running quarterbacks. I saw Jordan Travis of Florida State have a lot of success running the ball against LSU, and a lot of success throwing to his tight ends. And Auburn's got good tight ends this year, one of the deeper tight end rooms outside of Georgia. And I think that I have seen Robbie Ashford improve a little bit. And I think that they're gonna actually use Tank and Jarquez the way that they need to in this game. And I really think that, ultimately LSU's a better team. And if this was in Baton Rouge, I would 100% say LSU would win, probably by multiple touchdowns, maybe. But I just think that this being in Jordan-Hare Stadium at night, especially coming off what that crazy game was in Missouri, and knowing everything that needs to happen, and these Auburn players knowing the fact that they have to win this game for Brian Harsin. And you could even see it, Joe, in the locker room after that game last week, the celebration that they had, the videos everywhere. Of course, there's been a lot of people mocking it, which I get it. I mean, it was a win over Missouri. You shouldn't be that excited. But what they were excited about was knowing that the coach they cared about is still going to be there. And I really think that the motivation to win this game is so much more on Auburn's side. And from an emotional standpoint, I think Auburn's going to win when you add all those things in together. They shouldn't, but I think they will in a close one.
I mean, you definitely make a compelling case. Would not surprise me a bit if that happened. I'm just going to lean LSU. And, we'll see how it goes. I think it'll be fascinating.
It will. But let me tell you this, Joe. If Auburn does win, it'll be within one score, and something crazy is going to happen. Some of that video
I would think so. Out. I would think so.
But, one thing also I like about Harsin, too, and for me advocating for him to keep his job, he did beat LSU last year in Baton Rouge and ended that awful streak that had been going on since 1999. That was a long time for me, Joe. I could barely even remember the last time that Auburn had beaten LSU in Baton Rouge. The cigar game, I vaguely remembered it. But what I did remember was all of the awful losses that Auburn had there. They had, of course, the game where John Vaughn missed 5 field goals, where the joke after the game was that he tried to kill himself by hanging himself, but he missed kicking the chair out from underneath himself. I remember that one. I remember the Javier Verd play with the touchdown that ended on the last second. And there was just so many losses that Auburn had. And then, of course, the 2017 team that ultimately made the SEC championship, they blew a 20-0 lead in Baton Rouge. And Brian Harsin won that game last year. No one's talking about this. That was a huge win. And, if he can win this one too, that'll make 3 years in a row that Auburn has beaten LSU. I don't know that that's ever happened. At least in my mind, I can never remember Auburn beating LSU 3 years in a row. So like I've said, there's a lot of things that go in where I think if he can win this game, the noise is going to just quiet so much. And so, like I said, I got a good feeling with all these factors coming in that's going to happen, even though I think LSU is the better football team.
Yeah, it could definitely change a lot. And for whoever wins, I mean, it's going to be potentially a different season. It's a gauntlet of the schedule, for the loser going forward. And if LSU loses, suddenly everybody's saying, that Brian Kelly, is in the SEC and he just wasn't, ready for that type of job.
That's right, Joe. I mean, this is a game that decides whether traditional powers in the SEC are going to be among the bottom feeders or if they still have a chance to be in a rightful place in this league. That's what this game decides right here. Is Auburn going to be a bottom feeder this year? Is LSU going to be a bottom feeder? Or do they still have a chance to come up and still have a good season? And that's what we're going to find out at this game.
Right. Absolutely.
All right, Joe. Well, let's say that Auburn does lose this game and becomes a bottom feeder and Brian Harsin's on the next plane back to Boise. That leads me into a potential coaching option for Auburn, and it leads me to my lock of the week. Joe, Coastal Carolina has just been excellent. They're a covering machine. I love their offense. It's kind of in my mind like a improved version of Gus Malzahn's offense. It's got a lot of the wing T things moved in. There's a lot of spread running attack, and they do a lot of pop passes. And they've got a quarterback who's 45 years old and Grayson McCall, who he kills it with his offense. And I really love what Jamie Chadwell does. And I think that, let's say that Brian Harsin loses this game and ultimately gets fired, I think Jamie Chadwell will be a great person for Auburn to hire. Auburn has had a history of, they were called running back U. That's always been Auburn's thing, is they get the best running backs. And throughout time, it's been saying that Jamie Chadwell, I think his offense would be very appealing to a running back and to a running quarterback who, from Cam Newton to Nick Marshall, that's been something that's worked out really good for Auburn. And right now, Coastal Carolina is taking on Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern's a pretty good football team. They beat Nebraska, and, funny, we're talking about firing. They ended Scott Frost's career. Coastal Carolina is a 10.5-point favorite versus Georgia Southern. Last week, I saw Coastal Carolina beat, not record-wise very good, but talent-wise a very good, talented Georgia State team in Atlanta at the old Turner Field. They beat them by 4 touchdowns. Joe, I like Coastal Carolina to cover maybe the rest of the season because they're excellent. And if we had this 12-team playoff, there's no doubt in my mind that Coastal Carolina would be in it at the end of the season. I personally would love it if we have a lot of chaos to see them have the chance to make the college football playoff this year. And I think that there's no doubt at the end of the year they're going to be a top 10 team. I like Coastal Carolina, Grayson McCall, Jamie Chadwell to cover this game at 10.5.
I can certainly see that. I'm still surprised, that Chadwell, didn't get a job or take a job, in the last cycle or two, with the hype that he got. And I don't know if I'm more surprised about that or the fact that Grayson McCall still has eligibility. But either way, I think, that's a good pick on your part. The lock of the week for me is I was looking at the Nebraska-Indiana game at Nebraska, and I saw where stunningly Nebraska is a 5.5-point favorite the last time I think I checked in that game. And I think you definitely have to give the nod here and go with 3-1 Indiana.
Joe, I wouldn't favor Nebraska against Millsaps right now. I mean, I wouldn't favor them against anybody. University of Mobile, it doesn't matter. This Nebraska team is a dumpster fire right now. They're awful. Joe, they lost to a team that lost to Northern Illinois and Southern Illinois in back-to-back weeks. I mean, Northwestern is terrible, and Nebraska lost to them when they were leading. Indiana, they did lose a game last week to Cincinnati by 3 touchdowns, but Tom Allen's got a very disciplined team. They beat a good Illinois team earlier this year. The wrong team's favored in this, and I love this pick of taking Tom Allen and the Indiana Hoosiers on the money line against a really bad Nebraska product right now.
Right.
And Joe, here I'm going to give a couple freebies here too. I was looking at my pick sheet today, and this is the most money line picks that I've even considered all season. And there's a couple other ones that I think are solid money line picks for anybody that's going to Biloxi, Tunica, Vegas, what have you. Florida State is actually favored against Wake Forest, which, despite Florida State's win over LSU, which was really good, talking about keeping your job, I think that secured Mike Norvell's job, at least for this season, and quelled the Deion Sanders rumors. Florida State's been good. They're a good story. They're undefeated, but they haven't really, until we know what LSU is after they play Auburn, I wouldn't say they haven't really beaten anybody yet. They looked pretty bad against the Louisville team, which I don't have a lot of respect for. Barely beat them. And they're undefeated, but, they've been close to losing a couple times. Wake Forest looks excellent to me. They had a great chance to beat Clemson last week. It's not like Clemson threw 4 interceptions or something or played sloppy. Clemson had to play a pretty good game to beat Wake Forest. I like Jordan Travis as a quarterback at Florida State, but I think Sam Hartman's a lot better. And I think that Wake Forest is a good money line pick in a game where I can't believe Florida State's favored over them.
I can see that.
And Joe, the last one that I have, of course, we had to talk about the joy that I had in watching Texas lose to Texas Tech last week and completely make this narrative of Texas being back just a recurring joke. It's just always so funny that people just want to propagate it. Um, they're playing West Virginia this week, and West Virginia, in my eyes, is by far the best 2-2 team in America. They got robbed in that game against Pittsburgh. Poor interception, a joke interception return for a touchdown when a West Virginia guy dropped it. And then, of course, what I thought was a really controversial call at the end of the game where JT Daniels was playing out of his mind, threw a great pass. And I thought the West Virginia guy caught it at the 1 yard line. But for some reason, they overturned it and said it was incomplete. I don't know where they got that from. And Pittsburgh got the win. And then West Virginia lost to Kansas. And the story of college football, Lance Leipold's Kansas Jayhawks, who were undefeated in an overtime game. And those are the two losses right now that West Virginia has. West Virginia destroyed Virginia Tech last week. They have a solid running attack. They have a good defense. And I think that West Virginia beats Texas straight up and puts Sark on a really flaming hot seat coming into next week.
It would definitely be flaming hot if that happens. That would be really something.
That's it. So that's 2 freebies right there. You're welcome. And Joe, you mentioned a couple other games that you thought were, toss-ups. LSU and Auburn, that's one. Let's go and let's look at A&M and Mississippi State. Texas A&M is coming off a game where they survived by the hair of their chinny chin chin. Didn't deserve to beat Arkansas. Arkansas is probably a better football team than them, and they're playing a Mississippi State team who, outside of one quarter in the LSU game, has probably looked better than I've seen them look in quite some time. They've been pretty dominant through most of the season. But they were unable to hold on to the game against LSU, and LSU was able to come back and pull this off with a great fourth quarter. And Mississippi State seems to have a much better offense than A&M. They have a pretty solid defense. But Joe, after what I saw and the way they collapsed against LSU, is Mississippi State tough enough to win a game like this?
I think they can in Starkville, and I think also you have A&M coming off, the win against Arkansas, because it can work, both ways. If you're a team like Arkansas losing a game like that, it can make it tough to bounce back the next week. But if you win a game like that, the way A&M did, sometimes I've seen teams where that just kind of either goes to your head with the luck, or you just don't have the same focus the next week. And I really feel like Will Rogers and just this razor-sharp offense for Mississippi State, I don't know if they have the clutch gene at times, but I think this is a really, really dynamic offense, and I think they'll be able to outlast A&M.
Joe, I think this is going to be a close game, and I do think that Mississippi State's a good football team, but kind of like Arkansas, I don't think they're ready for prime time yet. And in these games where you have the helmets that have been there, that have won these close games, I know that A&M lost the game to App State, which was quite funny, but they've had a good recovery from their defense is excellent. They've got one of the best defenses. And I think that A&M, with their excellent running attack that you have, A-Chain was off the chain against Arkansas last week. I think he had 220 yards rushing in that game, a couple touchdowns. I think Max Johnson's playing a little better. And Joe, in the end, I don't trust Mike Leach's offense against a really good defense. And I also trust Jimbo Fisher to coach well and win a tight game. I'm giving the slightest edge to Texas A&M in this one to keep up what is a very weird season for them, but one where they're going to hang around the top 20 because they keep on winning. So I like Texas A&M in this, and probably kind of more of a low-scoring slugfest.
Yeah, I think it could really be, an interesting game, because I think it's going to be a game that's kind of buried behind the headliners of, Arkansas, Bama, and Ole Miss, Kentucky.
Yes, I think so too. I think it's a very good football game. And yet again, I said earlier, I picked Auburn to beat LSU. It's possible that Mississippi State's a better football team than A&M is. Mm-hmm. I just don't trust them to win a close game, because I saw what happened in that game against LSU, and that was a real setback, I think, for Mississippi State football, losing that game.
I would be more sold on A&M if not for Miami losing the way they did last week. That's the one thing that makes me a little bit more cautious about A&M.
Well, let me say this, Joe. I think when you start going into that huge analysis of what other teams did, I mean, does Alabama something look terrible right now because Texas went out and lost to Texas Tech? I think that
Well, it shows the vulnerability for them, for me, for sure.
It does. Well, hey, Joe, speaking of Alabama's vulnerabilities, they're traveling to Fayetteville this week to take on Arkansas in a game that probably, had Arkansas not had the oink and that field goal had gone through, probably would be college game day right now. It'd be the biggest game that we've seen in Arkansas since maybe 2010, in that kind of realm. The question is, we think that Sam Pittman's a good coach. He's obviously built a lot at Arkansas. They were falling way behind the eight ball. He's hosting Alabama. He seems to have all of the pieces to be able to hang with him. He's got a really great running quarterback in KJ Jefferson. He's got some pretty good receivers, Jaden Hazelwood. He's got a good running back in Rocket Sanders. He's even got the number one defense when it comes to sacks in the SEC, which includes a former 5-star that played for Alabama and Drew Sanders, who's their leading tackler right now. Does Arkansas have a legitimate chance to win this game, Joe?
I don't see it. I would like to think that they have a chance. Coming into the season, I was really high on KJ Jefferson. If they won last week, I thought maybe there was some promise there, but I kind of look, just the emotional loss last week. I think it's probably going to be something that turns into 2 losses, especially against a Bama team that basically got a bye last week, having an easy game against Vanderbilt.
Well, Joe, here's what I think. I don't think Arkansas wins this game. I like Alabama to win this, but I do think that Arkansas is going to keep it close. I do trust Sam Pittman's ability to not let that A&M game just completely destroy the rest of their season and get them down. I think that, we saw that this Alabama defense is not quite as good as everybody made it out to be. And I think that KJ Jefferson is going to have his chances to hit people like Jadon Hazelwood deep. And I think that, the rush attack the defensive rush from Drew Sanders and from Bumper Pool and the good front seven that Arkansas has, they're going to get to Bryce Young a little bit. Where Arkansas loses this game is their secondary. They have a very porous secondary, one of the worst ones in America, and I think Bryce Young is going to eat them alive.
Yeah, this Bama team, I feel like without Bryce Young, in my opinion, this is like a 3-loss Bama team. But because they have Bryce Young, that gives them a chance in every game. I still think, they'll probably slip up at least once.
I think so too, Joe. The biggest problem I see for Alabama is their offensive line is not near as good as it was in the past. They don't have the same kind of rushing attack. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is good, but he's more of a utility back than he is what you really want when you're Alabama, which is the bruiser that can get it all the time and, get you 3 yards in a cloud of dust and get you 150 yards rushing. Now, he may get 50 yards receiving, but he's not going to have that many 100-yard games, I don't think. And then we go to the wide receivers. There's no Jameson Williams. There's no Amari Cooper, no Jalen Waddle, no Jerry Jeudy. I mean, their best receiver is who? Ja'Cory Brooks. I mean, he had a great touchdown to tie the game against Auburn in the Iron Bowl last year. But Ja'Cory Brooks isn't even in the same sentence as any of those people I mentioned. He's not even anywhere near as good as John Mechie. I don't see the same level of talent at the receiver position for Alabama this year.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I could see Arkansas making this, a very interesting game, and then Alabama, finding a way down the stretch.
Exactly. Like yet again, we saw it with Arkansas last week. They're not ready for prime time. They can't win games like this yet, especially close games. But I do think that based on what happened, they're going to play them tight. And I kind of would, maybe think that had Arkansas won that game last week, you had College Game Day there and all eyes were on them. Maybe the same thing would have happened as when they played Georgia last year and they might have gotten ran out of the stadium. And now I don't think that's going to happen, but I just don't see them winning.
Yeah, I don't see a formula where they win.
All right, Joe. Yeah, I say we're gonna leave talking about Ole Miss and Kentucky till the very end. So let's go a little bit outside the conference. We talked about Wake Forest and Florida State as one that I saw as a really good chance to take an underdog in the Demon Deacons. Do you see Wake Forest winning this game and ending Florida State's surprising undefeated season so far?
I would say yes, more than likely. It still wouldn't surprise me if Florida State won, just because when I praise Wake Forest, I kind of look at them as just such an offensive juggernaut, but their defense, often lets them down. And that was the issue last year. I mean, that was really the difference between them maybe being an undefeated team going into the ACC championship game last year, was that they gave up too many points. Like they had
Mm-hmm.
that game against North Carolina last year where they gave up just so many points, even though their offense came out and played well. And I could see that being the case against Florida State. I'll say this: I know that Wake Forest's offense is going to show up. Does their defense put forth enough resistance to beat Florida State?
Yeah, that's definitely the question here because I think Florida State's got a pretty solid offense. I really like Jordan Travis and the way that he's developed as a quarterback. They also have one really solid receiver there. Um, it's just going to be how many stops can Florida State's defense get, and does Wake Forest defense have a pulse? That'll answer the question:
Mm-hmm.
who wins that game?
Exactly.
All right, Joe. Now let's move on to a game where both teams have defenses that have more than ample pulses, and in fact are the strongest units on the field. And let's also stay in the ACC with Clemson and NC State. This is your college game day game. Really good quarterback showdown between Devin Leary of NC State and DJ Uyangagale of Clemson. Clemson's coming off a really emotional, hard fought win over Wake Forest last week that went into overtime. NC State, survived the scare week one in a game they should have lost against East Carolina, and what's really just been a rough year for kickers. When you think about all these games that have ended in missed field goals, I don't know that I've ever seen this many. And NC State, this is the year where a lot of people had him as a dark horse college football playoff contender. A lot of people looked at him as the team that's going to win the ACC. Well, Joe, this is their chance. What do you think about Devin Leary and the Wolfpack taking on Clemson?
If it doesn't happen this year, it's just not going to happen ever for NC State. I mean, this is their prime golden opportunity. I mean, with the game being at Clemson, I mean, I have to give the edge to Clemson. To me, DJ's play, looking like he did, like you said earlier, 2 years ago against Notre Dame on offense, that showed a lot for me. I mean, my biggest concern is that Clemson's defense gave up all those points. I mean, albeit to Sam Hartman, but that's still, I did not expect them to give up 45 points. And so that'd be the only pause for concern to maybe give NC State some hope. But I do see Clemson winning this game.
Joe, I'm a big believer in Dabo. And I also am a big believer in him when I see his offense win games. Last year, that was the problem for Clemson, is that their defense didn't take much of a step back, but their offense took so many steps back. And you didn't see any games last year where DJ and the offense went out and won the game for Clemson. Well, I saw them do it last week, and I saw them take Wake Forest's best shots on, and motivate a defense that we know is super talented. I mean, Bryce Young was not the number one player in America coming out of high school a couple years ago. Who was, Joe? Brian Breezy, the defensive lineman for Clemson. There's a reason for that because he's that good. That Clemson defensive line is excellent. And I think that NC State showed in the first week that they were overrated when they should have lost to East Carolina. That game was not a fluke. Clemson right now has a quarterback that finally has confidence, that has all the talent in the world. By the way, that was the number 3 overall player in America, which is DJ Uyangale, right after Bryce Young. He's got plenty of talent. I think Will Shipley's running the ball really well. I think this Clemson team, they had their test last week. They survived it. And I don't trust NC State, especially not when they're going to take on Clemson at Howard's Rock in Death Valley. Got to go with Dabo and Clemson on this to win it. I'm thinking maybe even by 10 plus points.
Yeah, no, I think that's a smart pick. I think for all the reasons you stated, you've also got the luxury, if you're Clemson, of having a 5-star backup quarterback. If something goes wrong.
That's right. Everybody's big on Cade Klubnik. I haven't gotten to watch him yet. I don't think I'm going to get to.
I think DJ will play that well.
I think so. All right, Joe. Coming down to a game at the very end, which is the biggest one for us this week. I mean, I don't know. I've kind of got split allegiances on that. The Auburn LSU also a big one for me, but this is a huge one for Ole Miss. Taking on Kentucky at home. Uh, I'm really upset about the 11 a.m. kickoff. You explained to me earlier what the reasoning for it is. Doesn't change the fact that I think it's going to affect what should be an amazing atmosphere. You got real tree helmets and different uniforms that kind of got the cool blue to it. Um, Joe, what's interesting in this game is going into the season, I never would have thought that Kentucky would have the edge in quarterback, but they have a decisive edge in quarterback. But strangely, I never also wouldn't have thought that Ole Miss has got the edge at running back and the edge on defense. I've been blown away by Ole Miss's defense this year. And fun fact, Joe, I've bet the under the last 2 weeks on Ole Miss's defense covered both times. Ole Miss's defense playing some excellent football right now. So many storylines with this one. Chris Rodriguez, the really excellent running back for Kentucky, is making his return. A lot of people talked about Will Levis as a possible first-round draft pick. Kentucky's in the top 10. What happens in this, Joe? And is Kentucky a legit top 10 football team?
I think they're legit for sure. I think, though, this is anybody's game. There's a lot of factors I'm looking at. The start time is definitely, a worthwhile point. You never know how that's going to impact the home crowd as you kind of settle in. I look at the running back situation from an Ole Miss standpoint. I'm a little bit concerned because you have Rodriguez, returning, making his debut. But there's reports that Zach Evans may not be 100% going into this game.
Yeah.
He's still expected to play, but I do worry about that. Now, you've got Judkins, who's an outstanding, true freshman running back.
Had a great game last week.
Yes.
Judkins said.
Yes, he did. He did really solid. I feel better if you have both of them 100%, especially because the third string, Ulysses Bentley, I don't think he's going to be able to go Saturday. And so a little bit of a depth concern for Ole Miss's running backs, especially with the offense being so reliant on them. What we saw last week against Tulsa is Jackson Dart, kind of out of necessity, actually ran some read option at times and rushed for at least 50 to 60 yards. I don't know if he's going to do that more this week. I get concerned when a quarterback does that too much. I would, like to maybe instead of that set up some screen passes to try to get him some confidence. But I do come into this feeling like you would think on paper Ole Miss has some advantages at running back. A little bit concerned that Kentucky may have those advantages this weekend.
Yeah, Joe, this is a fascinating game for me. Like I said, I don't like the start time, but one thing I heard that I think maybe mitigates the effects that you're going to have with maybe having not everybody show up for the beginning of the game, maybe not be as hyped as they should be, is that, Kentucky's got to be, they're staying an hour outside of town. They're probably going to have to get up at like 5 a.m. in the morning. Obviously, they're staying in Tupelo or Memphis or something. And that's kind of tough when you have an 11 a.m. game and you're staying an hour outside of town. I think that definitely has an effect. In the end, this is going to be a game where I think the defense is going to help Ole Miss a lot, and that's going to keep them in it. But Joe, Jackson Dart is actually going to have to play well. He hasn't had a game this season yet where he had to play well. I think Lane Kiffin's restricted him a little bit offensively. This is his game because Ole Miss will not beat Kentucky unless Jackson Dart actually has a good game.
Yeah, he's got to come out and really play well and play, a clean game, not have any turnovers. And I think I want to see how, his former USC teammate Michael Trigg looks on this national stage. He had a game against Central Arkansas where he had 2 or 3 touchdown receptions. But, I want to see him in this type of environment have a big game and big moments. So, Jonathan Mingo is an important wide receiver. But at the end of the day, though, Dart has the offensive line that's really, really good. I'd say top 3 offensive line in the SEC to protect him. And he's a guy with a lot of talent. He was the Gatorade National Player of the Year in high school, put up big numbers at Utah, but he's got to show that on this stage.
That's right, Joe. Yeah, this is one that I've been like going through my mind multiple times, but when I consider the injury problems that Ole Miss has at running back, I don't trust Jackson Dart. I've always thought that Altmaier was the better quarterback. I do like Will Levis. I've seen what Will Levis can do in a hostile environment in the swamp, which is one of the most brutal ones you can be in. He went down there and they got down early against Florida and they came back and won. I really like Mark Stoops as a coach. I'm going to go Kentucky on this one, especially with the return of Chris Rodriguez. And Joe, in the end too, I think that 11 a.m. kickoff just really bothers me and the atmosphere that's going to be there. I think if this game was a night game, I would still say Ole Miss is going to win, but I'm going Kentucky to win this game in a very low scoring slugfest. I like Kentucky 24-21 in this one.
Okay. Yeah, it's so hard for me too because like the points I was making and like you referenced, the running back situation and the health of Zach Evans really does concern me. I want him to be 100% because I think he's a great running back when he's fully healthy alongside Judkins. I think Judkins is better when Evans is 100%. But at the end of the day, there's something about the Lane Kiffin element. I trust him in a game like this. I feel like he will find a way. I feel like he will call plays, he and Charlie Weiss Jr., that allow Dart to have some success. And I think that Ole Miss will be able to pull this out.
Well, I hope so, Joe. I mean, this would be a huge opportunity. And this would be a game that Kentucky's got in the top 10, Tennessee's got in the top 10. Ole Miss gets in the top 10 if they win this game. And, I saw Lane Kiffin give a shout out to all the fans talking about how upset he was about the turnout for the Tulsa game and how it looked like he was going into a high school game. The fans need to show up for this one. And they need to show up early. And they need to be loud. And same thing with Auburn and OSU. I mean, the Auburn fans need to create that kind of atmosphere. I know they're a little down on what's happened on the football field, but they can still change a lot of things. That's what my point was. It's been, the game last week allowed there to be opportunities to be changed. And Ole Miss needs to have a real home field advantage to win this game. And the 11 a.m. Kickoff doesn't need to affect that.
Yeah, I mean, they need to come out and have kind of a crowd like they had against the Arkansas game last year. Where that was just a classic, overtime game. And that's kind of – I don't expect maybe a game that high scoring, but I do think we'll have some definite craziness in a game like this.
That's right. By the way, Joe, my last little pick I'm going to throw out, I've been talking about how the under has been a covering machine for Ole Miss and its defense. I'd roll with the under on this one again because Kentucky's got a solid defense. And I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I got 24-21. It wouldn't shock me if this game was 17-14 even.
I could see that.
All right, and we will see what happens in all of these big games from Bama, Arkansas, Auburn, LSU, to Ole Miss and Kentucky, all the way to Wake Forest and Florida State. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.